Caffeine. One of, if not the most, widely accepted and used drugs on the planet, with some sources claiming up to 85% of the US population consumes at least one caffeinated beverage per day. And who can blame them? With caffeine finding its way into such a wide variety of products, it's admittedly quite difficult to avoid it. But contrary to the negative connotation behind the word drug, caffeine can be quite beneficial. And if you knew and weighed the pros and cons associated with caffeine, I have a feeling you would come to that conclusion as well. Before discussing the pros and cons, however, let's first understand what caffeine is and how it works. Caffeine, or 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine, belongs to a group of compounds known as methylxanthines, which are primarily known for their stimulatory effects, which in the past you have consumed caffeine, you have already experienced. One of its most well-known stimulatory effects is its ability to increase wakefulness. And it seems to do so through a process known as adenosine antagonism. Now, for context, when adenosine binds to adenosine receptors, it causes you to feel more tired. And when you wake up in the morning after a good night's sleep, feeling well rested and wakeful, that's generally because your adenosine has been cleared from your receptors. Now, since caffeine has a structure which is very similar to adenosine, it can very easily take over and bind to the adenosine receptors, which inhibits adenosine from binding. There are 4 subtypes of adenosine receptors present in the various tissues throughout the body, and caffeine's effects are mainly attributable to its binding to the A1 and A2A receptor in the brain, which is the primary driver of many of caffeine's effects, such as increased wakefulness, alertness, blood pressure, and heart rate. And when it comes to caffeine's ergogenic effects, the effects are less perceived pain, less perceived exertion, and enhanced maintenance of motor unit firing rates. So now that we understand the main mechanism behind caffeine's effectiveness, you may be wondering what the actual benefits of caffeine are. And when you take a look at a 2019 Umbrella review, which is basically just a meta-analysis of meta-analyses by Ergogenic et al., with the goal of systematically reviewing, summarizing, and appraising the findings of published meta-analyses that examine the effects of caffeine on exercise performance, we see that caffeine has a positive impact on aerobic endurance, muscle strength, muscle endurance, aerobic power, vertical jump height, exercise speed, and short-term high-intensity exercise. So, caffeine supplementation amongst athletes is a no-brainer. And other than just the ergogenic effects of caffeine, there are also health benefits associated with the antioxidants found in coffee and tea. Namely, reduced risk for mortality, liver conditions, depression, arthritis, certain cancers, type 2 diabetes, among other components of metabolic syndrome. So, now that we know the benefits associated with caffeine, it's time to understand how to actually use it. Now, when looking for the benefits for the more nootropic aspects of caffeine, such as increased alertness and wakefulness, doses less than 3 milligrams per kilogram generally seem to do the trick. So, a morning coffee will generally get the job done. However, if you're looking to increase exercise performance, most of the research tends to be in the 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram range, with most studies aiming for the higher 5 to 6 milligram per kilogram end of that range to make sure that they actually see a consistent effect. Now, it's important to mention that 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight can potentially get you into a pretty high caffeine dose. For one example, I weigh 100 kilograms of body weight, and I wanted to get in that range, I would need 500 to 600 milligrams of caffeine. So keep in mind that you don't go too high with your caffeine dose when chasing the performance benefits. A general guideline I use is to not exceed more than 400 milligrams of caffeine on average. So if I were to take a high 600 milligram dose one day, the next day I would stick to getting below 200 milligrams so that the 2 days combined average out to below 400 milligrams. I would also like to mention that for caffeine enthusiasts, getting more than 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight does not seem to show any increase in the performance benefits in the literature. In fact, some studies actually show a detrimental effect to consuming more than 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, with one study showing participants who ingested 9 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine report effects such as tremors, dizziness, sweating, and vomiting. Now, generally, whenever taking caffeine before going to the gym, the literature seems to suggest that you should take it 30 to 90 minutes before the gym, depending on how fast a caffeine metabolizer you are and what type of food you ate, if any. My general rule of thumb is to hit the middle 60-minute mark of that range and adjust from there depending on your personal experience of when you feel the caffeine hits you the most, since caffeine metabolism is generally very individual. And speaking of caffeine metabolism, I should mention that genetics play a huge role in the rate at which you metabolize caffeine. Therefore, the half-life of caffeine has tremendous variability, the general estimate being a 3 to 6 hour half-life, but some studies have shown it can range from 2 hours all the way up to 12. Now, this video isn't long enough to get into the genetic differences in relation to caffeine metabolism, but I will link a Stronger by Science article down below by Eric Trexler that does get into a bit more of detail on the topic. Now, a common concern I often hear about caffeine is about caffeine habituation, and this concern does have founding. If you're a regular caffeine consumer, it's pretty evident that you will experience some degree of habituation over time. And it's hypothesized that some of the habituation may be caused by our body increasing the number of adenosine receptors, therefore attenuating caffeine's effects. Regardless of the mechanism, it's pretty clear that some of caffeine's effects, such as its effects on heart rate, physiological arousal, blood pressure, wakefulness, and alertness, tend to be affected by our tolerance. But that leads us with an important question: whether or not you build tolerance to the performance-enhancing effects as well. And well, the literature doesn't seem to be 100% clear on this, but so far, a recent 2022 meta-analysis by Carvalho et al. Seems to show that habitual caffeine use has no real effect on the ergogenic effects of caffeine. However, most of the studies in this meta-analysis used observational methods to determine habitual caffeine use prior to the study, which can be flawed. There are a few experimental studies that actually study the ergogenic effects of pre-exercise supplementation over a 20-day period, which should have habituated them, and found that the effect size of the ergogenic effects decreased, but didn't completely disappear. So my conclusion of the current research is that there's not much, if any, effect of habitual use on the ergogenic effects of caffeine if properly dosed. However, if you are still skeptical and would like to ensure that there is no habituation effect on the ergogenic effects of caffeine, you can instead caffeine cycle, which is essentially just to take a 3 to 7 day break from caffeine every 3 to 4 weeks in order to resensitize your response to caffeine with larger caffeine doses, likely requiring the longer end of the break range. Now, lastly, we have a topic that I often get questions and concerns about for very good reason. Sleep, which is actually, in my opinion, the most important topic du jour, since proper sleep is crucial to all aspects of health and fitness, and, in my opinion, is the closest thing a natty can get to taking steroids. Even though I'd love to do an in-depth dive on the benefits of proper sleep, I'll leave that as a topic for another video. So, since we know that caffeine binds to your adenosine receptors and increases wakefulness, it's understandable to be worried about its effects on sleep. And there's actually lots of research showing us that this is, in fact, the case. Even for individuals who claim that they can take caffeine right before bed and still fall asleep and sleep fine, the research shows us that regardless of how much sleep you're getting or how quickly you fall asleep, caffeine will still disrupt your sleep quality even if you get a full 8 hours of sleep, which will in turn make you wake up tired and needing more caffeine, which starts the infinite cycle of caffeine intake causing poor sleep, and poor sleep causing the need for larger caffeine intake. But lucky for you, if you want to know how long before bed you could intake caffeine and not experience any detriment in sleep, we can look at a 2023 meta-analysis by Gardner et al., which examined the effects of caffeine on the characteristics of nighttime sleep with the intent to identify the time after which you should not consume caffeine prior to bedtime. And as you can see here, it would seem that if you're thinking of consuming a daily caffeine intake of less than 50 milligrams, you generally won't need to worry about what time you take your last caffeine dose. However, if you're consuming a total caffeine intake of 100 milligrams, or the equivalent of a coffee, you'll want to make sure that you consume your last dose around 9 hours before bedtime. And if you're consuming a total daily caffeine dose of 200 milligrams, or approximately 1 scoop of pre-workout, you'll want to consume your last dose around 13 hours before bedtime. Now, these general guidelines are based off averages, so it may be different for your individual scenario depending on how fast a caffeine metabolizer you are. However, this information is still good to have for lots of people or as a general guideline. But for the average gym goer, I suspect most of you will be consuming more than 200 milligrams of caffeine daily, which makes sense if you're trying to reach the 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram threshold for the ergogenic effects of caffeine. So, for anyone who generally does take a larger than 200 milligram dose, yet wants to still have good sleep quality, I recommend taking that dose as early as possible in the day. And if you can't take it early, given that you may work out late in the afternoon, I recommend implementing daily undulating caffeine dosing, which, to put it simply, is just to take a low to no dose on most days of the week and increase your caffeine dose to the 3 to 6 milligram per kilogram range on days that are very important in your workout or that just tend to require more effort out of you. This should theoretically simultaneously stop caffeine's habituation and reduce the risk of any chronic sleep loss or drop in sleep quality, therefore allowing you to not only get the benefits associated with caffeine, but to get the benefits while being well rested and avoiding habituation, which is, of course, the best combination an athlete can hope for. So, if you do decide to take caffeine and you keep all of this information in mind when doing so, I'm confident you'll be able to see great benefits with this new addition to your supplement stack. Yo, what's going on, guys? I'd like to thank you all so much for tuning into this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video if you know someone who might also benefit from the information in this video. It would be very, very, very much appreciated. It does take a lot of time to study and put all of this information into a hopefully entertaining form. Again, I'd like to thank you all so much for watching the video, and I will be seeing you guys next time. Peace.